So I'm Kit Monkman. I'm the managing director of Viridianfx, which is a visual effects house here in the heart of York. The visual effects industry is, certainly in the UK, is kind of predominantly based in London. I mean, massively so. And even then within a very small part of London in Soho. So it is unusual to have a visual effects house in York. I believe we're the only visual effects house working in film in the whole of Yorkshire. But for me, it's exciting. It's exciting on two counts. One, because I believe that we can compete with London in terms of our skills and ability here, the work that we produce. But also because I think it gives us an opportunity to differentiate ourselves and be different and be distinct. And some of the work that we do here is really quite unlike any visual effects house's work anywhere in the world. There are two projects that we've just finished, which represent two very different ends, if you like, of this visual effects world. One is called Solace, which is a sci-fi movie starring Stephen Ogg, who sits in a spaceship hurtling towards the sun, and it's sort of a little bit like Gravity, I guess. It's a lower budget, but it's very visual effects heavy. And they're the kind of visual effects which the industry is used to, in a sense, in that the judgment that people will make is, am I convinced? Do I believe he's in a spaceship? Do I believe that the sun is there? All of those sorts of things. And I think we've done a very good job. I think it's an incredibly accomplished piece of work, and it sits alongside anything that would be produced by a comparable visual effects house in London. What we've done with our other project, Macbeth, is something very different. We've made a piece that asks a very different question about what visual effects could be and might be. So whereas, for example, as I said with Solace, the idea is you're out saying to the audience, we're going to convince you. And if the audience at any point goes, I don't believe in your stars, your sun, your alien planet, if there were one, then you failed. In Macbeth, we've tried to flip that all on its head. We've tried to take visual effects and to use it in a way that starts as its premise with this is artificial. Just as you would if you walk into a theatre. Nobody sits in a theatre and expects to see the moon, or if they do, they expect it to be an analogy of the moon, something that stands in for the moon. And we wanted to embrace that same sort of theatricality using this very, very sophisticated technology to see where that could take us. Actually, Macbeth's a good example of what I find interesting creatively, and it's something that I find York as a city nurtures enormously, which is, I mean, Macbeth clearly is, it's a 17th century play that is deeply familiar and deeply rooted in our culture. And we've taken some very new and emerging technologies and tried to see what happens if you rub those two things up against each other. And I think that's one of the things that I'm fascinated by. I'm absolutely fascinated by the opportunities that new technology opens up, but particularly in relation to them being used to sort of shine lights on a kind of traditional culture or traditional ideas or stuff that's embedded within a cultural process already. And I think York is extraordinary in that way, because it's a city that is absolutely of the moment and it's current, and yet it's kind of layered with such visible stratas of history that you just go out for a coffee and you walk out the door and you can't fail but be kind of reminded of all of the predecessors and the thought and the invention that's kind of gone into making this a place that's so extraordinary to live. I've been embedded in York for many years now, and it's been an extraordinary place, and it's extraordinary in so many ways. I mean, I'm nurtured by a group of people who I've known for many years, many of whom I've met through organisations within the city that have appeared specifically for that purpose, to sort of bring people together. And I have an incredibly important, for me, relationship with the university, which is entirely come out of a result of those sorts of city networks that were put in place. And then there's a very specific example of a sort of city political intervention, if you like, in my own working practice that made an extraordinary difference to me. Maybe 15 years ago now. And we were at the time largely working on making algorithmic sort of visual designs for pop shows, but they were all screen based, and they would use the music as an input, but they were fun and they were kind of relatively clever, but they were aesthetically quite limited. We were looking for ways out and other things that we could do, and the city came along with a pot of money and a request that was about reinvigorating the city after dark, and there was really no other remit, I think, than that. And at the time we were sort of playing around with the idea of using movement as a input into our kind of algorithmic visual system, if you like. But to be honest, and if I'm honest with myself, at the time I kind of thought this is it's a bit of a red herring, it's a bit of fluff and fun to do, but we did it, and we made this little piece that was put in a square just off Davygate, so a little kind of raised bit of ground. And it was tiny, that's a small space, and it was a little kind of series of digital doodles that meant nothing. I mean, they were just that. They were little digital doodles projected down on the ground, but they reacted to people's movement. And the absolute breakthrough moment for me was that what people did in the space was that they imposed their own narratives and meaning on these meaningless little playful things. And in that spark of watching that and being allowed to see that happen, which would never have happened without this little kind of intervention from the city council, we started a series of work that's kind of ongoing, and so that's 15 years or so, and has grown into a series of works where we make 35, 40-minute long pieces of public theatre based on this one very sort of simple premise. And so that work that had its kind of genesis in this tiny little germ of an idea in York has grown hugely, and we've now done performances of similar, much larger scale work all over the world. So we did a piece for the World Expo in Shanghai. We've done pieces all over China, the States, all over Europe, and it's been in a sense a great ambassador, I think, for the city, and certainly a huge experience for us. I think if you're going to base yourself in York, it's important to try to punch above your weight, because if you don't, all you're ever going to be seen as is a kind of country cousin of big London visual effects houses, and the only way that you can compete in that ground is with originality. It's the quality of thought. It's the invention. It's the arrogance, if you like, to think completely differently about how these things might work, that can raise your game and make you an interesting player in a field in which you are not in the central pond. One of the lovely things, in a sense, about working with new technologies is that what next is slightly outside of your own control. I mean, just as it is for all of us anyway, but it's even more so because you know in a sense that if you're going to continue to follow the trajectory that you've always followed, that there's a series of ideas or thoughts or pieces that are not yet realizable because the technology that you're going to realize them with is not yet available. So I like that. I like the fact that there is always this sort of unknown about the next thing. But actually, I think absolutely we want to build a business in York. We want to build it along the same lines, which is to compete with Soho in terms of skills and ability, but also to differentiate ourselves from the rest of the visual effects world, not just from London, by making stuff that is constantly asking the question what visual effects can and should be in the future.